We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Daled Amud Aleph in Mesechet Sanhedrin. This is Sanhedrin Daf 104a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara brought a statement from Rabbi Yochanan that legima, which is providing food, it is great. And there's a number of reasons that the Gemara listed on the previous Amud. And the first was merachekes es hakrovim, that it distances those who are close. And the Gemara explains the source, Me'amon u'Moav, that comes from Ammon and Moav. And Rashi explains Ammon and Moav, Karovin li Yisrael, they were close to Klal Yisrael, Shabo Milot ben Achi Avram, because they come from Lot, who is the son of the brother of Avram. V'richkan hamakam shelo yavo b'kol, but because they didn't provide food, that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu said that they're not allowed to join the community of Klal Yisrael, and that's the idea of merachekes es hakrovim, it distances those who are close. And the Gemara continues, the next thing that legima is great for is umekareves as arachokim, it brings those who are distant, it brings them closer. Where do we see that from? We see that in Yisro, we see that from Yisro. Do Yamar Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan said, B'schar kirin lo v'yochal lochem, because Yisro said, call him and we'll give him bread, that's legima. Zachu b'nei bona v'yashu b'lishkas hagazis, so his descendants, they merited to sit in the lishkas hagazis. And where do we see that from? We see that shenemar, as it says in the pasuk in Divrei Hayamim u'mishpachos, so from Yosh Yavitz, from the families of the scribes, those who dwell in Yavitz, Tirasim, Shemasim, Suchasim, the Tirasim, Shemasim, and Suchasim, Hema Hakinim, they are the Kinim, Haboim and Mechamas Avi Beis Rechav, that come from Hamas. The Kinim here is referring to the descendants of Yisro, so you see that they sit in the Sanhedrin, they sit in the Lishkas Hagazis. And how do we see that the Kinim refers to the descendants of Yisro? That we see from the pasuk in Sefer Shoftim, Uchsiv Hasam, it's written over there in Sefer Shoftim, Uvnei Keni Chosin Moshe, Alo Meir Hatzmarim Es B'nei Yehuda Midbar Yehuda Asher B'negev Arad Vayelech Vayeshav Esa'am. And so you see again that the B'nei Keni is referring to the B'nei Keni Chosein Moshe, again the descendants of Yisro. And Rashi explains, Vayeshu b'lishkas hagazis mimishbecho. So from again they sat in the lishkas hagazis as part of the Sanhedrin. V'haikram mefarish leikuli b'sifri. Rashi says this entire pasuk is explained in the Sifri. Heimo hakinim haboim mechamas avi beis reichav. These again are the kinim. V'kinim elu bonav shel Yisro. The kinim refers to the children of Yisro. D'chsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, as was mentioned in the Gemara. Uvnei keni chosein Moshe. It says b'nei keni chosein Moshe. Uvonav shel Yisro heinein bonav shel reichav. And the children of Yisro, that's also the same reference as bonav shel reichav. D'chsiv, as it's written, hakinim haboim mechamas avi beis reichav. Again, the pasuk said at the end, avi beis reichav. Uchsiv, and it's written in Sefer Yirmiyahu, leveser rechavim amar Yirmiyahu kicho amar Hashem yan asher shmatem al mitzvahs yonadav avichem leicharis ish lo yonadav ben reichav midlefonai kol hayamim ve'amrinan besifri. And we say in the Sifri on these psukim, efshar nochrim heim v'nichnasan lehechel. Do you think we're talking about non-Jews entering the Beis Hamikdash? V'arei kol Yisrael lo nichnasu lehechel. Even Klal Yisrael, not all of Klal Yisrael could enter the Heichal. Ela shahayu yoshvin b'Sanhedrin. Rather, it must mean the pasuk is saying that they sat in the Sanhedrin. And again, that's the source, that the descendants of Yisro sat in the Sanhedrin. And the Gemara continues, the next thing that legima is great for, u'ma'alem eseinayim min harashayim, it causes HaKadosh Baruch Hu to hide his eyes, so to speak, from the wicked, not to punish them. Mimicha, that we see from Micha, that was mentioned on the previous Amud. Rashi explains, Mimicha damrin aleil, we said earlier, hanichu lo shapito mitsuya lo ovrei derachim, leave him aside, and we're not going to punish him because his bread is available for those who pass by. And the Gemara continues, the next thing that's great about legima, ma'ashra shechina al nevi'ei habal, that the Shechina rests on the nevi'ei habal because of legima. And we learn that mechavero shel Ido hanavi, we learn that from the colleague of Ido, the prophet. T'chsiv, as it's written in the pasuk and Sefer Malachim, vayhi em yoshvim el hashulchan vayhi dvar Hashem el hanavi asher hashivo. And Rashi explains, umashra shechina al nevi'ei habal mechavero shel Ido hanavi, again from the colleague of the prophet Ido, we learn that the Shechina rests on the nevi'ei habal. Rashi says, the Ido hanavi nisnabe al mizbech Beisel sheyicharev. Ido, the prophet, he prophesied that the mizbech and Beisel would be destroyed when they shehemid bo Yeravim tzlamim, because Yeravim put idols there. D'chsiv, as it's written, v'nei isho elokim bami Yehuda vayomer mizbech mefarish b'seder olam dahainu Ido hanavi. The Gemara explains that is referring to Ido. Ubon navi hasheker v'yiteu Ido, and then a false prophet came and he led Ido astray. V'heishivo leveisel, he returned him to Beisel. V'aviru al mitzvahs HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he caused him to transgress the commandment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sha'amar lo tashu leveisel, he said not to return to Beisel. V'hechilo, and he gave him food to eat. Uvischus she'echilo, and in the merit that he gave him food to eat, shar sa'ol of Shechina, that's why the Shechina rested on him. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, v'yidvar Hashem elo ish hanavi asher eshivo le'echilo etzlo. Again, it says that the word of Hashem was to that prophet who brought him back and gave him food. And finally, the last thing that is great about legima v'shigigasa ola zada, and something that's done by mistake is considered as if it was done on purpose. The Amar Rav Yehuda Marav, because Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, El mali helveu Yehonasan leDavid shtei kikaros lechem. Had Yehonasan given to David 2 loaves of bread, lo nerga Nov ira kohanim, then the city of Nov, the city of the Kohanim, would not have been wiped out. They wouldn't have been killed. V'lo nitrad Doeg HaAdomi, and Doeg HaAdomi would not have been banished from Olam Haba. V'lo nereg Shaul u'shloshas banav, and Shaul and his 3 sons would not have been killed. And Rashi explains v'shigigasa ola zado, and the mistake is considered as if it's done on purpose. Shari matzino b'Yonasan, because we find by Yonasan sheshagag that what he did was really a mistake. V'lo helveu David shtei kikaros, he didn't give the 2 loaves to David. V'nenash, and then that punishment happened. The Yamar Rav Yehuda, because Rav Yehuda said, etc. Laveyu is lashon levaya. It's the lashon of as he's escorting him to provide him some food. So if he would have given that food, lo nerga Nov, then Nov would not have been killed out. Why? Shelo yatzarach David lishol lechem mikohani Nov, because David would never have had to borrow the bread from the Kohanim of Nov, and then Doeg would not have told, and then Shaul would not have been killed because of that sin. And the Gemara continues, why didn't they count Achaz as one of the kings that did not have a share in Olam Haba? And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba, Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba says, Mimnei Shemutal bein Shnei Tzadikim, because he was between 2 Tzadikim, bein Yosam lechizkiyahu, he was between Yosam and Chizkiyahu, and that's why he was not counted. And Rashi explains, Shemutal de Aviv Yosam uvno Chizkiyahu, because his father was Yosam and his son was Chizkiyahu, and therefore he's not counted among those who don't have a share in Olam Haba. And the Gemara continues, Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yosef says a different reason, Mimnei Shehayalo Boshas Panim Yeshayahu, because he was at least embarrassed from Yeshayahu the Navi. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Vayamar Hashem al Yeshayahu, Hashem said to Yeshayahu, Tzeina likras Achaz ato shar Yoshev bincha, go towards Achaz el katzei teilas habrecho el Yona el mesilas stay koves. And how do we understand the end of that pasuk of koves? My koves, what does it mean koves? Iko diamri, some say techavshinu liape, that he covered his face v'cholaf and he passed by. It showed he had a certain embarrassment from Yeshayahu. V'iko diamri, and there are others that say uchla de kitzri, a vessel of the launderer, sachaf areshe v'cholaf, same basic idea. He put it over his head and he passed by. Again, he had that embarrassment. And Rashi explains, "Usharmi Yisrael sheshavu lios bonecha v'talmidecha v'chol mi sheyashav leveischa dahainu talmido." Rashi understands that the Shar Yashav over here refers to the rest of Klal Yisrael that returned. My koves techavshinu liape. What is koves? Techavshinu liape. He covered his face. Shekavash es panav. He covered his face. Vayemisbayesh from Yeshaya. He was embarrassed from Yeshaya. Koves again, kamo kovesh. And uchla dekatzria sachafaresh. He put this vessel over his face. Klimanukov shel kovsin shemezalfen bomayim. It's a vessel they use to sprinkle the water al habegadim on the garments. So that vioso kli hafach achaz Rosho, he turned it over onto his head. That's what Achaz did. Kadesh lo yakiri Yeshaya, so that Yeshaya shouldn't recognize him. Again, the same idea. Shaya misbayesh mimenu, because he was embarrassed. He was ashamed from him. And we will note over here that though Rashi understands Ushar Yoshev Bonecha means the remnant that returned, the other way to understand the pasuk is it means that the name of Yeshayahu's son was Shar Yoshev. And the Gemara continues, Mivnei Malo Monu es Amon, why didn't they count Amon among the kings that do not have a share in the world to come? The Gemara answers, Mivnei Kavodo Shel Yoshio, it's because of the honor of Yoshio, that was the son of Amon. Menashe Nami, so the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, Menashe also, Lo Nimni, we shouldn't count him either, Mivnei Kavodo Shel Chizkiyo, because of the honor of Chizkiyo. The Chizkiyo was the father of Menashe, and the Gemara answers to that, Bra Mizake Abba, a son can give merit to the father, but Abba Lo Mizake Bra, but a father does not give merit to the son. T'chsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, Ve'ein mi yodi matzil, there's none to save from me. We understand that to mean Ein Avram a matzil as Yishmael, that Avram does not save Yishmael, he's the father. Ein Yitzchak matzil as Esav, Yitzchak, the father of Esav, doesn't save Esav. And the Gemara continues, Hashta dasas lachi, once we're saying this, so Achaz nami loim, then we can go back to Achaz and say that he wasn't counted, Mishum kavodo shel Chizkiyo, because of the honor of Chizkiyo, because Chizkiyo was the son of Achaz. And the Gemara continues, Malo Manu es Yehoyakim, now why wasn't Yehoyakim counted? And to that the Gemara says, Mishum de Rabbi Chia bar Rabbi Avuya, it's because of what Rabbi Chia bar Rabbi Avuya taught. The Yom Rabbi Chia bar Rabbi Avuya, because Rabbi Chia bar Rabbi Avuya taught, Ksiv al Gugoloso shel Yehoyakim, it was written on the skull of Yehoyakim, Zos v'yod acheres, it said this and another. And the Gemara continues with a story related to this. This was also mentioned a little earlier in the Masechta. Zikeno de Rabbi Preda Ashkach Gulgalta, the grandfather of Rabbi Preda, he found a skull. To have a koshadya b'shari Yerushalayim, it was thrown in the gates, by the gates of Yerushalayim. Uchsibba, and written on the skull was Zos V'Od Acheres. It said these words, Zos V'Od Acheres. Kavra, he tried to bury it. V'lo ikvra, it wasn't successful in being buried. Kavra v'lo ikvra, he tried again and it wasn't buried. Amar, and so he said, Gulgulaso shal Yehoyakim, this must be the skull of Yehoyakim. T'chsiv bei, because it's written with regards to it, Kavuras Chamori, covers Chov Hashlech, again, it'll have this kind of unsuccessful burial. Amar, and so he said, Malkahu, he's a king, v'lo echshel lezalzule bei, we shouldn't treat him in a disgraceful fashion. So Karcha b'shiroi v'osva b'sifsa, he wrapped it in silk and placed it in a box. Chazisa devisu, and then his wife saw it. Savra haditasa kamaisa hava. So she thought this must be his first wife. The halo kaminchila, he hasn't forgotten her. And so shagra tanur v'kosa. So she took it and she threw it. She burned it in the oven. And hainu dechsiv, and that's what's written. Zos v'or acheres. This and another. It was like a double punishment happened to the skull of Yehoyakim, and because there was so much punishment, that's why he didn't lose his share in the world to come. It's considered as if he already received his punishment. And the Gemara continues, Tanya, we learned in a Braisa, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, B'shvil hatov be'einecha asisi, because Chizkiyo made the statement, hatov be'einecha asisi, I did what was good in your eyes, which was a boastful statement. So because of that, ma'os, because of that he asked for a sign. He was asking for a sign that he would be healed. And b'shvil ma'os, and because he asked for that sign, nachrim achlo al shulchanu, that's why non-Jews, they ate by his table. And b'shvil shenachrim achlo al shulchanu, because the non-Jews ate by his table, garam golus levanov, that caused exile to his descendants. And the Gemara says, Messiah leila Chizkiya, this is a support for what Chizkiya said, the Yamar Chizkiya, because Chizkiya said, Kol hamizamin ovid kochavim l'soch beis, so anybody who invites an idol worshiper into his house, umeshamesh olav, and serves him, gorim golus levanov, that causes exile for his descendants. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, uvanecha asher yetzu mimcha asher tolid yikachu v'hayu sarisim beheichal melech Bavel, they're going to be taken, your children will be taken into the palace of the king of Bavel. And Rashi explains, B'shvil hatov ma'os, because of again saying that I did what was good in your eyes. He then said, Ma'os, what is the sign? B'shvil Chizkiya sheshibech es asmo. Chizkiya praised himself. D'amar hatov beinecha asisi, he said, I did what was good in your eyes. Goram lo, that caused him, sha'amar Ma'os, that he said, what is the sign? Ki ela beis Hashem, that I'll go up to the house of Hashem. Shashol os me'HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he asked for a sign from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which he should not have done. Sha'avera goreres avera. One avera causes another avera. And Rashi continues, Achlu nachram al shulchano, the non-Jews ate by his table, Osam shashalach lo merodach baladon, Svarim umin chal yadam, those are the men that merodach baladon sent over to him after this happened, Umeshamesh olav, and then serves them, Kagon Chizkiya damina lekamon ishto, hishkeso aleim, Chizkiya served them, as we're going to say later on, Gorem golus, that causes exile, Dechsiv vayismach aleim Chizkiyo, Vayarim es beis nechoso, Chsiv basrei, it says again, he showed them everything, and then right after that it says, Umi bonecha asher yetzu mimcha it says that the children will be taken into the palace of the king of Bavel. And the Gemara continues, the pasuk says in Sefer Yeshayahu, Vayismach aleim Chizkiya vayarim es beis nechoso es hakesef es azov es habesamim es Hashem and hatov. It says that Chizkiya showed the men everything. This is the pasuk that Rashi just quoted. Amar Rav says, my beis nechoso. What is the meaning of beis nechoso in this pasuk? And the first explanation is ishto hishkeso aleim. He had his wife. She poured drinks for them. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says beis genozov heralohem. He showed them his treasury. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan says zayin ochel zayin. He showed them a weapon so strong that it could break another weapon. And the Gemara continues, the pasuk says in Eicha Yashva Badad, and the Gemara says, Amar Rav Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rava says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Mimnei Malaku Yisrael be'Eicha, why was Klal Yisrael, why were they struck with this word Eicha? Mimnei Sha'avru al Shloshim V'Sheish Krisos Shebetorah, because they violated the 36 Krisos, that's punishments of Kares, violations that carry a punishment of Kares in the Torah, and the Gematria of Eicha is 36. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, why were they struck with the Aleph Beis? A lot of Eicha is according to the Aleph Beis. Because they violated the Torah, which was given with the letters of the Aleph Beis. And the Gemara continues again. The pasuk said, "Yoshva Bada," that the city sits solitarily. Amar Rava, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rava says that Rabbi Yochanan says. Some have the gears of Rabba says that Rabbi Yochanan says. Amar Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Hakadosh Baruch Hu says, "Ani amarti, I said, Vayishkon Yisrael betach Bada dein Yaakov el eretz Dagon v'Tirosh avsham v'yarfu tal." I said that Klal Yisrael would settle betach; they would be secure. But achshav yeh Badad moshavim. But now the city is going to be solitary. And the Gemara continues, Ha'ir Rabbasiyam, it said in the pasuk that the city was full of people. Amar Rava, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, again, some have the gears of Rabba. Rava says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Shahayu Masiyan Ketana Legadol. What does it mean, many people in the city? It means that a younger girl would marry an older boy, Ugadola Lekatan, and an older girl would marry a younger boy, Kedei Sheyehu Lahem Banim Harbe, in order that there would be many children. And the Gemara continues, Haisa Kalmana, again it says it's like a widow. Amar Rav Yehuda Marav, Rav Yehuda says that Rav says Kalmana, velo almana mamish, like a widow, but not actually a widow. Ella rather Kiisha, like a woman, Shahalach Ba'ala Lemedinas Hayam, like a woman whose husband went far away, Vidaito Lachzor Eleho, and he has in mind that he will return to her. And the Gemara continues, Rabbasi bagoyim sarasi ba'medinos. The pasuk says it was great among the nations. Amar Rava, Rabbi Yochanan. Again, some have Rabba. Rava says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Kol mokum shein holchin nasin sorim ladonei. Everywhere where they go, they become like officers to their masters. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Ma'aseh b'shnei b'nei Adam, shenishbu b'Har HaKarmel. There's an incident, 2 people were captured in Har HaKarmel, v'hayashavoy mahalech achareihem, and their captors were walking behind them. And Rashi explains, Lako bi Aleph Beis, again they're struck with the Aleph Beis, Shekal Megillas Eicha, Sedura ba'Alpha Beta, because the entire Eicha is according to the Aleph Beis. Betach Bodod Sheyoshven Yechidim, it means people are able to settle alone, Ve'enon Misyarin, and they're not afraid at all. Lomin Hanochrim, Velomin Chayos Ros, not from the non-Jews, and not from the wild animals. And Rashi continues, Ketana Legadol, they would marry a younger girl to an older boy, Shechva Zera Shel Katan, Enam Avushal, Ve'enam Azriya Maher, Keshel Gadol, the Shechva Zera of a younger boy is not as fertile as older. V'chein Rechem Shel Katani, and a Kol Atis Mar Keshel Gadola, the same thing by the womb of a younger, it's not as fertile as older. Lefikach, therefore, Masin Gadola Lekatan, Kedei Lecheshetei Zaram Avushal Koled Maher, Ukatana Legadol, Kedei Shechva Zara Koled Maher, Velo Katana Lekatan Sheshoin Lehola. They wouldn't have a young girl marry a young boy that would take long to give birth. Rather, they'd always have one of them be older, so there'd be more chance of conceiving. And Rashi continues and notes, Velo katanu katana mamish. Now, we don't mean here a young meaning an actual minor. Ela sha'omden al pirkan, we just mean that they're young, they just became mature. Uru'uyin heim laholid. Now, they're able to have children, but again, they just reached maturity. Umiu ein zera shel hem avushal kalkach. Again, they're not as fertile. That's what we're referring to here in the Gemara. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Dalid Amud Beis.